Hi everyone, thank you for joining us here today. I'm Mickey Feldman-Simon. I am the founder of I'm Back at Work, and we have Debra Woog here with us today. I'm excited to have you here with us. Debra is going to talk with us on unmasking women in crisis, the 3 keys to navigating life's inevitable big challenges, those challenges that we've all faced and will face too. A little bit about me. So I am the founder of I'm Back at Work. I am a certified career and executive coach. My passion is helping people become a better version of themselves, both personally and professionally. I have over 25 years of corporate experience. I've held roles in a variety of fields, from marketing, business development, human resources, and recruiting. I also have a master's in organizational behavior and a bachelor's in psychology and educational counseling. I'm a mother of 2. I have recently become an empty nester. My 2 kids are 25 and going to be 20, the other one this weekend. And I am enjoying my newfound freedom and life with my husband and my 2 poodles. So I've taken multiple career breaks throughout my life to move continents, as you hear from my accent. I've done that multiple times, to take care of my kids when they were young and to take care of my aging parents. I successfully returned to the workforce after each one of those breaks, and I found that I'm back at work wanting to help women who've taken career breaks get back into the workforce. And I'm so proud to say that through this platform and collaborations with such wonderful people such as Debra, we've helped thousands of women regain their independence and their confidence. So now we're going to move forward, and the first thing I want to make sure is that you can navigate the GoToWebinar control panel. So your panel may look like the image on the right where it is closed up, or the image on the left where it is expanded. And to open or close it, all you need to do is click on the orange arrow at the top, and that will open and close the webinar panel for you. You can also drag and move it out of the way, and you do that by just placing the cursor at the top of the panel, and then you click on the top of the panel anywhere and drag it out of the way. In the last 5 minutes of our webinar, we will have a Q&A session. To ask questions, just click on the gray questions bar and then type in your questions in the blue rectangle underneath, and we will address all of your questions at the end of the webinar. So now I'm going to turn my video camera off so you can concentrate on the presentation and listening to Debra. And Debra, the platform is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Debra Woog. Oh, got my picture back here. I'm Debra Woog. I am a crisis navigation partner, and I'm going to tell you about what that means during my talk. I've had my own business, Connect2 Corporation, for it'll be 21 years in March. I'm a mom. I have a sophomore in high school daughter and a junior in high school son. I have lots of things that I love to do. And my background in some ways is similar to Mickey's. I studied psychology undergraduate, and I studied business for my MBA, and I had a particular interest in organizational behavior like Mickey does, and also in communications. So I feel like my academic work has really informed very strongly what I'm focusing on these days. I'm going to turn off my camera so that you can see the slides. Hopefully that worked. Okay. All right, great. So I want to start off by telling you a little bit of a story. Which I can sometimes make a long story, but I want to make a short story. So 7 years ago, last week, January 15th, my son was, let me just back up for 1 second. For me, what was going on was business was really clicking along. I'd been in business 13, 14 years, and I was doing consistent marketing. I had a full practice. I was always doing all the marketing activities you need to do when you have your own business, so that when one client was ready to move on, there's someone else to come in. Everything was going great. I was speaking. and I was really enjoying all my work. My kids were in school, both in elementary school, and have settled there. And I had things going, had things organized. And 7 years ago, January 15th, my son, I noticed we were watching a football game, and I noticed he kept going up to use the bathroom. He kept peeing, and it was an awful lot of times. And I was thinking about that and thinking, I remember he had complained about being really thirsty lately. And I had said to him, oh yeah, of course you're thirsty because we're visiting Grandma and Grandpa in Phoenix. It's the desert. Everyone gets thirsty here. Nothing to worry about. But this time when I realized how much he was peeing in a very short period of time, and that actually he had wet his bed a few times recently, which he hadn't done in 4 years because he was 10 years old, I realized there's something really wrong here. And because I'd had gestational diabetes, I knew how to check his blood sugar. His blood sugar was so high that the meter just said HI on it and wouldn't even give a number. And so I called the pediatrician and told her what was happening. And I'd always been kind of afraid that my son might be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes because I had gestational diabetes with him, and there's a connection between those things. There's no connection between gestational diabetes and type 1 diabetes. But at that point in my life, I didn't even really know the difference between those. I just knew type 1 was worse. So when the pediatrician said, based on everything you've told me, based on the fact that I saw him 3 weeks ago, based on the fact that he's lost 6 pounds and that his blood sugar is so high the meter can't read it, he has type 1 diabetes. So I don't like being a person who makes things more dramatic than they are. So I tried to kind of tamp it down. I said, oh no, doctor, I'm sure it's just type 2. I know that's not quite as bad. So that's probably it. And she said, oh no, it's definitely type 1. Here's how you know. And I said, okay, nice try on my part. And then she said, so you need to go to Boston Children's Hospital now. And I said, well, it's 9 o'clock at night. My daughter's already in bed sleeping. Well, I'm just gonna wait till the morning. And she said, no, you really need to go now. So again, I tried to say, okay, this isn't that big of a deal. I can manage it. But then when she said, it's type 1, then you really have to go to the hospital now, I snapped to attention, quickly made arrangements for my daughter to spend the night at a friend's house, even though it was already kind of late, woke her up, got her where she needed to go, and took him to Boston Children's Hospital. They got him settled and comfortable. They were amazing there. And they said, you're going to be here for 4 to 5 days in the hospital. So after Aiden was asleep and in his room, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 in the morning, I just remember sitting there with my laptop and going through and canceling all the rest of the work I'd scheduled for that week. It was a Monday. And so I had speaking things that I was doing, and I had clients that I was seeing, and I had meetings that I was going to in person, and I just needed to cancel it all. And it was suddenly a very big shift in how I live my life. And that was before we even spent the next 4 or 5 days learning all about how to take care of a kid who has type 1 diabetes. So this is an example of what it's like to suddenly be in a crisis. Sometimes there's warning signs that one is coming, and sometimes there aren't. A crisis really has 2 definitions. It's either a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger, or it's a time when a difficult or important decision must be made. And if you don't have experience with type 1 diabetes, I can tell you that it is a different definition of insanity. So usually the colloquial definition of insanity we talk about is when you do the same thing over and over again and you expect to get different results, right? People say that's insane. Every time you've done this before, X has happened. Why would you think Y would happen now? Well, type 1 diabetes, the joke about that is that it's a different definition. You do the same thing over and over again consistently, like eat the same amount of food or have the same amount of exercise or take the same amount of insulin, and a different thing happens every time. It's just not predictable. So it's a time of constant making decisions all the time. So in retrospect, I realized why I felt so much that I was in crisis mode 7 years ago, because not only was it intensely difficult and also dangerous for his health, but also there were so many decisions to make all day long. And it took me a while to get used to that as his caregiver. What I've realized looking back upon this and really thinking a lot over the summer, last summer, about why my previous work of being a management consultant and a leadership and career coach, it wasn't quite satisfying me anymore, and it wasn't quite fulfilling to me anymore. And I tried to figure out why. And when I did a whole bunch of career coaching on myself and realized that the reason was because what I was doing didn't have the extreme intensity of dealing with a crisis. And it's not that I like to be in crisis all the time, but I really wanted to be supporting women who were going through something especially difficult like I was. And for whatever reason, they felt mostly alone. Maybe they didn't have family or friends nearby that they could depend on or that were available to help them. So I know that crisis is basically inevitable in your lifetime. You don't know what the size or the type or the severity or when it's going to happen. But I would guess that everyone listening to, watching this webinar right now has experienced at least one crisis in their lives and will likely experience more in the future. So normally when I'm giving this talk, I ask if you've experienced a crisis, but obviously this is not an interactive format that we're on today. But here's some examples of crises that you may have experienced. Could be a divorce, could be a physical health or mental health diagnosis for you or someone you love, dealing with death of a loved one or someone who's dying. Also, downsizing a business, either because you've lost your job or because you're in the position that I was in once, where as a former head of HR, I had to lay off everybody in the organization and help close it down. And that's a crisis when you're letting all these people know that they have to lose their jobs and trying to help them through that. Another kind of crisis is a legal dispute, and I have unfortunately been through those too, and they are very intense. So you or a loved one, you're in crisis if you're in a trauma, if you feel burnout, if you're stressed, if you're overwhelmed, if you're struggling or you're unproductive for a significant length of time. A crisis can be short-term or a crisis can be long-term, like a chronic illness. It's not necessarily a catastrophic event, although a crisis can be a catastrophic event, like a plane crash, or a big fire, or a natural disaster, or a terrorist attack, mass shooting, something like that. But the kinds of crises that I usually work with people on are the more localized ones, where they're really impacting your life and your loved ones' lives, or the people who work right around you, more than something that's on a national or global or even regional scale. So I'm going to share with you this slide of concentric circles now, and then I want you to keep this image in mind because I'm going to refer to it again. When you look at these concentric circles and you think about the person who is absolutely in the middle of the crisis, let's take my son Aiden, the night he was diagnosed with diabetes. He was what I call person zero. He was right there in the middle of it. It was happening to him. I was the point person, one ring out from him, his most like on deck person to take care of him. And obviously he was a child, he was 10 years old. So that was an extremely important role. But you can be a point person taking care of an adult, taking care of a spouse or a significant other or another loved one. And it can be extremely intense, just like it was for me with a child. And what I've learned is, since I've been labeling these positions, you can think of yourself as probably you've been a person zero in a crisis, probably you've been a point person in a crisis. For me, from my work these days, it's almost more intriguing and fulfilling to me to be the support person for that point person, because it can be a very isolating role. And sometimes it's really harder to be the point person than it is to be the person zero. I'll give you another example of that. About a year before Aiden was diagnosed with diabetes, he and Kira, my daughter, who are both allergic to peanuts, and we've known that since they were both very young, were accidentally given what was a peanut butter cream-filled whoopie pie. The person who gave it to them thought it was a chocolate cream-filled whoopie pie, but it was peanut butter. And they were sitting in the back of a car, small enclosed space, and Aiden took one bite of his whoopie pie, and Kira was still finishing whatever her sandwich was or something. And she smelled the peanut butter sitting next to him. And she said, Aiden, that's peanut butter, don't eat any more. And then she was 7 years old at the time, but she went into major point person mode. She's the one who said, we need an EpiPen. We have to get the EpiPen right now. We have to call mom. We have to call 911. We have to go to the hospital. She knew what the things were to do. And she was, in a way, the most capable person to handle that situation at the time. Aiden was having anaphylaxis, and she actually was the person who was more together at that moment than the adult who was with them. So I met them at the hospital, and Aiden was absolutely covered from head to toe in hives. They were, usually hives are described as the size of money. You know, that's the size of a dime or the size of a quarter. These hives were the size of a dollar bill, and they were just all over him. And I have this app on my phone that every day it brings up photo memories of what happened that date X years ago. And it just so happens that the other day I saw the photo again, and it really kind of blew my mind. So we were in the hospital after they'd given him the 2 rounds of epinephrine. His body still hadn't quite calmed down yet. He was safe, but he was not at all comfortable. And the nurse and I were putting washcloths that had been in a bucket of ice water all over his body. So we start at his toes, go all the way up to his head, covering with these all exposed skin with the washcloths. And then as soon as we got to the head, we started again at the end because everything heated up on the bottom. And so we had to do it again, trying to keep him comfortable. My 7-year-old daughter was there, the person who was the point person. Of course, I was a point person there on the scene now, helping also. Aiden was fine the next day. He went back to school the next afternoon. Thank God he was fine. But Kira really wasn't. She was the person watching all of this. And she was the person who had to make the calls and take care of Aiden in that very scary moment. And honestly, I think that was a trauma for her that has influenced her life and development since then. And I tell you this story to say that it's an example of where being the point person can be tougher than being the person zero. Because Aiden, I don't honestly think he thought about it much more in the time since this has happened, even in the days afterwards. He went back to playing, he went back to sports, he had life as usual. But Kira was so on the lookout all the time for potential danger for her brother and for herself. So I want you to think about what is your role in a crisis when you're in one in the future. But I also want to help you prepare for being a point person or a person zero in the future. Since I can't prevent you from experiencing crisis, I feel like that's what I can do for you now through this talk, is give you some suggestions of how you can prepare. When I've been in crises, when my kids were in crises, the most painful parts, I think, were the 2 things. One, the sense of overwhelm. There was so much to do at once in each of these stories. And another was the sense of isolation. Nobody quite understood what I was going through, or nobody had time to be there for me as the point person, or other times as the person zero, the way that I wanted support. Which again is why I have started this business as a crisis navigation partner. So what does that mean? This is my definition of crisis navigation partner. This is a designated confidential resource to help you lead your way through difficulty to the best possible option. And some of the things that I do for people in crisis is I help them with outsourced research projects. If they don't have time to look for options, I connect them to resources. I'm a sounding board, I give emotional support. And maybe the biggest one is that I help them prepare for difficult conversations. There are a lot of difficult conversations that come with crisis, and you've probably experienced difficult conversations even outside of crisis as well. We'll talk more about those in a moment. But as I started to say in my introduction, I feel like all the training and all the experience that I've had in my career in business, in psychology, as a trained mediator, as a functioning ombudsman, they've all come together for me now in this one purpose. And it's really kind of exciting to make a difference this way. So if you're preparing for inevitable challenges in the future, there's 3 keys to getting through a crisis. And I'm going to talk about each one. They're communication, capacity, and community. So the first one about communication, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each one because we have limited time today. So for communication skills, the best thing you could do to prepare is to build up your difficult conversation muscle. There's 3 kinds of difficult conversations you can have. One is where you need to gather information and data. Another is where you have to inform other people. And a third one is where you have to negotiate to get what you need personally or professionally. All of these conversations can be difficult because they feel high stakes. They might feel high pressure. You might be dealing with another party who you feel like is more powerful than you. There's lots of reasons. If you're interested in learning more about difficult conversations, I have 2 resources for you. One is where this link is. This link is down here, this bit.ly link. If you go to that link and you put in your contact information, I will be able to send you automatically this tip sheet I've put together for preparing for difficult conversations. And in there will also be information about a course that I'm teaching online via Zoom coming up in February. And I'm also going to be doing it on a regular basis throughout the year. It's called How to Win-Win Any Difficult Conversation. So if you're interested, get that one sheet handout and hopefully it'll be really useful for you. The second C for preparing for crisis is capacity. There's so many factors that go into capacity, but I want to just give you some quick information. Think about how you can make sure that you're at the top of your game. Think about, do you have contingency plans or can you put some in place? I now have a plan for my business so that if something happens to me or I'm taking care of somebody else can come in, pick up that plan, have all the passwords they need, have all the contact information they need, and step in, get in touch with all my clients, get in touch with all the people on my team who work with me. Having a contingency plan will expand your capacity because somebody can step in for you and be really helpful. So I encourage you to have those personally and professionally. And another thing is just thinking about how much time do you have available? Can you expand the amount of time you have available? Obviously, you can expand the amount of time you have by letting go of some of your expectations of yourself, and you can also delegate. Breathing and self-care and getting emotional support, those also all expand your capacity because it helps time to slow down a little bit when you're back on your game of handling things in your crisis. So I encourage you to build up your capacity now as much as you can. One more thing I want to tell you. Oh yeah, I forgot about on communication. I'm just going back for a second. Remember those concentric circle rings that I showed you before? There's something called ring theory. So picture that set of concentric circles in your mind. Picture the person 0 in the middle and the point person is 1 ring out, right? We talked about that before. Depending on, you're somewhere on the ring for somebody in your life who's having a crisis. And what I want you to remember from ring theory is something pretty simple, which is called comfort in, complain out. So let's say I'm really sick of everything I have to do to deal with my son's chronic illness. I'm sick of dealing with insurance companies and I've had it up to here with the pharmacy and I'm so frustrated trying to deal with everything that happens at school and there's so much. If I'm feeling that stress of being that point person, can I tell Aiden, should I complain to Aiden? No, he's the person 0. I need to complain to somebody who's another step removed from me and Aiden. Maybe I would tell my mom, for example. Maybe I tell my best friend. So it's fine to seek support for myself. It's just important to go outside on the rings when I need support, when I need to complain, when I need someone to just really hear and understand what I'm going through. But my job is to comfort someone who's on inner rings for me. So my job is to comfort my son. Or if I'm the best friend to another mom with a kid with type 1 diabetes, my job is to comfort and support her. So that's another communication tip I want you to take with you for the future, as you know other people going through crises as well. And then the third C real quick is community, and there's a lot to say about this, but think now about who are your extra pairs of hands, your extra brains, your extra hearts, the people who can come on board with you and support you. Build up your community in advance so that you have people to turn to. I honestly don't really think that I had that when I was going through the crisis with Aiden. And ironically, I ended up developing community with a whole lot of people I didn't know before who also had a child with type 1 diabetes. And we've been there for each other ever since. So develop your community as best as you can. I just want to wrap up because I know that it's almost time for questions. So during a crisis, here's some tips for you. Use the communication skills we talked about to ask for what you need. Make really careful choices about how you're spending your time so you keep your capacity as high as possible. And leverage your community in any ways they're willing to support you. Be willing to accept help. And if they say they offer help and you don't know how they can be helped, how you can be helped, ask them, how do you think you can help me? Put the onus on them to come up with ways that they can support you. I give all my best tips and tricks for dealing with crisis and preparing for crisis through Facebook. So if you'd like to follow my business page and learn more, get some more inspiration, please go to facebook.com/connecttwo. So that is my presentation for today. Here's our final slide, and I'm going to turn the camera back on, which I think I can do. Are there any questions, Nikki?
Thank you, Debra. Obviously, the dog knows that it's the end.
Sorry,
hi, everyone. Thank you for listening and staying with us on the presentation. I hope you gathered a lot of information from Debra's great tips. And now is the time for you to ask any questions that you may have. And while you type in your questions, I also want to invite you to join the I Am Back at Work Facebook group. It's a women's only group, and we support each other throughout, whether it's job search, everything in life. And Debra, we do have a question from Jody. How do you meet with clients in person, on the phone, over Zoom?
Okay, sorry. I think when my dog is going crazy, I'm sorry that she is. Can you just say the question one more time? How do you?
Sure. How do you meet with clients in person, on the phone, or over Zoom?
Oh yeah, thanks for asking. So actually, yes, all three of those things. So I work with clients virtually, and then I can also go on site to be with clients. I've gone to hospital beds. I've gone to school meetings when parents were fighting for resources for their children. I can come to where you are to support you, as well as being available for you virtually.
We'll wait another few seconds to see if there's any other questions. Jody, I believe that answered your question. So Debra really supports people in all different ways throughout the crisis that they're going through. So at this point, it doesn't look like we have any more questions, Debra. So thank you very much for joining us here today. And I appreciate all of you joining us here as well. And please join us in upcoming webinars and watch our recordings. Thank you, Debra.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.